Brooke Schofield, Tana's co-host on the canceled podcast, recently got into some hot water because some old tweets of hers were repopularized and sort of brought mainstream, and they showed, some racism. We'll just say I'm not really trying to get into that aspect of it here because largely I do agree with Adam that Brooks' tweets were wild. There's one in particular where she basically says George Zimmerman did nothing wrong. It was all just self-defense and that sort of thing, which just crazy. But he also says that, the first time around, Ethan of H3 was overly forgiving of her and basically said, oh, one time in 2020, she said, I'm nice and I like liberal things now. So I think she's changed. And I don't really agree with that either. I don't think that's enough. So I, I want to start off just by saying I agree with Adam on the whole. And the reason I'm doing this segment is because I think what he says here turns away any viewers that potentially don't agree with him politically already. He makes it so he can only really be preaching to the choir. And, if he doesn't care about that, fair enough. But the way he talks in his content, I get the impression that he would like to, bring people over to the left if possible. And just changing this sort of stuff, I think, would help him do that.
Places have
Yeah.
different cultures about it. Like I grew up here in Los Angeles. I have pretty progressive parents and everything. And I remember from a really young age, really young age, like, in elementary school and like when I was like 8 or 9 years old, being told emphatically that, the N-word is like one of the worst things in the world you could call somebody, especially a black person. You should never do that. Like that was like taught to me. Now, that is in Los Angeles with like progressive parents, you know what I mean? In the 80s and 90s, I think in a lot of places.
And I mean, again,
Yeah, so Dan explains he grew up in a big city with big city parents. So not only did they personally sort of spread more progressive ideas to him, but he was in a place where lots of people would have anyway if his parents didn't get to him first, And now Adam's going to kind of talk about his.
and I would love to hear other people's growing up stories about this, because I guess we're so used to influencers blaming racism on the way they were grown up. Again, speaking personally, I grew up in a very, very, very small city. I mean,
very, very, very small city. So I'm thinking, oh, he grew up in a tiny little town. When he says that,
what is the population of Derry? What is the population of Derry? Derry population. It might actually be quite big, but it feels smaller. Derry population, about 80,000 people.
80,000. Yeah, so that is quite big. For reference, I'm from Minnesota, and according to Wikipedia, a town of 80,000, that would put him at a town that's 7th or so, and that's according to the estimates of above what it actually was before. So he'd be living in the 7th or 8th biggest city in the state if it was in Minnesota. And besides that, Minneapolis, St. Paul, that's the Twin Cities. That's one metro area. Rochester, that's where Mayo Clinic is. So lots of the people that are there are, dying or getting treatment or that sort of thing, or nurses, doctors that are there for work. And then Duluth, that is actually a separate thing that is like its own city. Bloomington, Brooklyn Park, Woodbury, Plymouth, Lakeville, Blaine, Maple Grove. Those, I'm pretty sure every single one of those is a suburb of the Twin Cities. And then, you go down and there's some other moderately sized cities. But you quickly go down and then these have single thousands. There's tons of these. The 3,000, that's kind of where I grew up in, and my town had 3,000 people. But there's tons of these tiny, tiny little towns. So to say you grew up in a town with 80,000, you don't have a reference for any of this, okay? You don't have an idea of how these people live or how their perspectives are created. For reference, the UK has 67 million people, and look at that compared to the United States. It's way more dense. You just don't have an idea for how rural some of these places are, especially, in this whole general area before the West Coast. And Minnesota is not like a super dense or super rural state. They're kind of in the middle, 30th in terms of population density. So there's 20 states that have even less population density than Minnesota.
That's not much. That's not much.
It's
Um,
much.
and there are so many issues in Derry. There's so many issues in Derry. But I remember from a very, very, very young age, my nana would take me to a Sunday school. And the Sunday school was very, very, very diverse. And I remember from literally being like, oh my God, I would have been so young when she would have started taking me to it. And, she would purposely put me in classes on the Sunday school where I would be surrounded by a very diverse group of people. And I'm so
So again, that's not an experience that you're going to have living in a rural town in the United States for the vast majority of people. And and this is not, to shit on Adam that he doesn't understand this perspective. I just trying to explain that you grew up in a different world than these people that you seem to kind of think you have a similar life experience to.
so grateful for my nana for that, because when I look back on it, my skills were very, very, like, I think about this all the time. A lot of the schools in Derry were very, very, very white. Like, my primary school was very, very, very white. And even my secondary school as well. Like, and they were two Catholic schools. But I was always so grateful that my nana always, like, put it out of her way to put me in situations where I would my I would meet more diverse people, because I think back on just how
Yeah, that is cool. That's good that got that opportunity. It would be great if more small town people could get that, but there's just millions of people in the United States that don't have that sort of experience.
white my primary school was specifically, and I'm like, what the hell was going on? Like, it was so great that I was being included in so many conversations, from like my nana bringing me to Sunday school, and my parents wanted me to be in the Sunday school, just to kind of hear other people's experiences growing up. And I grew up alongside these people. I'm still friends with these people. And I always, would be in conversations with their parents whenever I was very young, because my nana would be talking to them. And I just think that while you can be brought up in a way where you're, like I'm saying, where you're being, put in so many diverse situations, which is so good. I also just think as well that it's very easy to not be racist. And for
And it's like, yeah, that's because of your experience, but you you can't relate to the experience of all of these millions of people that grow up in small US towns. And this is not to say that I disagree that it is relatively speaking the easiest time to not be racist in history. You can go online and watch tons of videos and hear about other people's experiences and get a sense of this stuff in a way that you could not in the past. But if you're living in a tiny little town like this, you probably have pretty crap internet. Like I couldn't really play online video games like Call of Duty or stuff when I lived in a small town because the internet was just so bad it wasn't fun. I could do the stuff where fast internet doesn't matter as much, like a civilization type game or something, but no first person shooters or anything like that. Couldn't really stream video very well. We had the DVD version of Netflix. Like, it's just very different. But yeah, there is still the ability once you've moved away from that, once somebody's had a couple years away from being so insulated and surrounded by few thousand people that generally think one type of way and reinforce that in you the whole time you're growing up. Yeah, once you've had some time, I think it makes a lot of sense to hold people accountable for their ideas. And even before that, you can hold people accountable for their actions much more so. But I just don't think it makes sense to hold people super accountable just for ideas that they have. Once you go into influencers posting things online or whatever, then I think that more becomes an action territory because you're spreading that a lot more. But just in terms of the people having those ideas in this town, these small towns, I think you gotta give most people a little bit of time to move away from their families and figure things out in the rest of the world because it is super insulated and it's a totally different experience than growing up in a place with tens of thousands of people in one city.
People that, blame being racist on family members or their upbringing, again, like so many people were commenting on my YouTube video, they grew up in very racist households and they chose not to be racist. It's very, very, very easy to not be racist.
You don't choose though. That's the thing. Like you have to have some sort of experience that prompts that. And when you live in a really small town, it's a lot harder for that to happen. Obviously, like those people are saying, it can happen, and that's great. That's awesome. I'm all for that. But I do also just think give people a couple years to have that experience.
Very easy. And I think a lot of people just ignore that fact as well. So anyways, I think Dan's saying this where we can talk about like our upbringing and stuff, but at the end of the day, it is very easy to not be racist. So
in the country, a lot of people, maybe Brooke is one of them. I don't know anything about Brooke, you know what I mean? But
I'm not even talking about her. I'm just
in general.
About, like,
yes, I think that, there was sort of like a learned racism for a lot of white kids.
Well, in the 80s, Jim Crow was only like 20 years before that.
Right, exactly. Like those parents grew up with that. So yeah, it's not exactly universal, I guess is what I'm trying to say, the lived experience of people growing up.
Sure, yeah. Obviously, a lot depends on where you grow up.
Yeah.
But I do think there's been...
Great point, Ethan. It does depend where you grow up. I mean, yeah, that essentially was my whole point, that it really does make a huge difference. You have just a completely different experience. And that's not to forgive or say it's okay for these people to have these ideas. Like it's bad and we should try to change their ideas. I genuinely believe that. But I think when we talk this way, where it's just like, oh, it's easy to not be racist. I grew up in a very, very small city of 80,000 people. No, and if he doesn't care about that, fair enough. Just do your drama content or whatever. But the perception I have, the way he talks, it seems like he wants to bring people over to the left, at least somewhat. Obviously, it's not the thrust of his content, but it seems like an underlying value of his.